So I don't think that you can look at the internet, you can't read a newspaper without talking about AI. So much to say, also so much confusion on generative AI versus ML versus AI that's been around a long time. We'll go through all of that. Let me just briefly introduce our amazing panelists. So Sri Ambati is the founder and CEO of H2O.ai. And I think the way to think about Sri, and in our short interactions, is he's a product visionary. He has a world-class team, started in 2012 as this entrepreneur, and his mission is about democratizing AI for everyone, anywhere, and creating a movement where the world's top data scientists and physicists and academics and technologists can come together. And one of the things that Sri is really passionate about is how you think about AI for good, and what are the actual practical applications of responsible and fair use of AI that helps address some of the world's and humanity's biggest problems. So that's Sri. In the middle, we have Christian Mitchell, who is an executive vice president and chief customer officer at Northwestern Mutual. And you might say, is Christian an academic? But he actually has earned his stars and stripes in the practical application of AI. And one of the things we wanted to do for this panel is bring it down to the users and how companies are actually taking AI and creating unbelievable outcomes and the innovation that's happening within. So Christian's going to talk about that. And so if anyone thought that insurance is not a technology-enabled industry, well, Christian's going to tell us differently. And finally, we have Kunle Olukotun. Oh, so sorry. I practiced that like 6 times and I garbled it. Kunle is a professor at Stanford in electrical engineering, computer science, and he's been a pioneer for all of his life in multi-core processor design and a leader of the Stanford Hydra chip multiprocessor, CPM research project. And in 2017, he and another professor, colleague of his from Stanford, co-founded SambaNova Systems, which is a machine learning and artificial intelligence company. Really, really interesting. And he not only co-founded it, he continues to be a chief technologist. And so we've got everyone from a business of a large-scale enterprise to a CTO to a founder CEO here to talk about AI. Now, the title of this is Delivering on the Promise of AI. And there's so much. And just to frame this, at least in our own research, we looked at the global potential of AI to be $10 to $15 trillion. That's a lot. However, in November of 22, we had seen a flattening of adoption. And by that, I mean a flattening, meaning companies that were only adopting in one, not more of their functions and organizations, AI to drive business outcomes. So we were seeing this flattening. And then all of a sudden, as we talked about backstage, ChatGPT rolls along. And in 5 days, 1 million users, consumers, everyone from teachers, students, to computer scientists, to CEOs, to HR executives, everyone's using it. And all of a sudden, it is as if we have met AI for the first time. And everyone's talking about it. So with that, I just want to go to you, Kunle, in terms of this is not a journey that started with ChatGPT. There have been many inflection points in AI. Can you just at least frame for us how we got to the moment we're in now?
Yeah, I mean, so, if you go back in time, of course, there was, deep learning, right, which, made it much easier to create these models because you didn't have to do all of the, it was much easier to create the training data sets and you could feed these models directly. But I think the real kind of interesting inflection point from the point of view of models happened around 2020 with these with the emergence of these what we now call foundation models, right? These models that are 100 billion parameter plus models trained on huge amounts of data, and they have a number of interesting properties, right? The models that they learn have this this ability to do. To do self-learning, right? So that what happens is that you don't have to train your model to do a specific task anymore. You can just give it prompts in English, and it can adapt itself to the task that you want. right? So it can go from doing text summarization to object classification to sentiment analysis, all by changing the prompt that you give the model. And this, happened around 2020 with with GPT-3 from OpenAI, and there were other models around the same time. There was DALL-E also from OpenAI. There was Palm from Google. There was a model from AI21, and this made it possible to go from an idea to a working application in a few days, and this previously would have taken you weeks or months to build some specific task model, right? So this idea of being able to prompt these models and come up with new tasks was a dramatic change in the way that we developed AI, ML applications. The other big benefit from these generative pre-trained models, GPT, was the ability to generate new content. Not just analyze existing data, but generate new content. The content could be text, it could be copy editing, it could be images, it could be blogs. And so this capability of being able to generate new content gave the models dramatically greater capabilities, and that capabilities weren't really harnessed until OpenAI decided to wrap a chat bot with some extra capabilities around it in order to make it accurate enough, and that of course was announced and presented to the world in the form of GPT in November 22, and of course, we all know what happened next. Is within a few days it had 1 million users, and really heralded the capabilities of what this technology was capable of. And the key innovation was the foundation model had existed years before, but the interface and ease of use and capabilities that were enabled to be consumed by the average person was what made all the difference.
I really think the user interface was the unsung hero here.
The user interface.
Yeah, but GPT-3 has been around for a while, but all of a sudden you had this really clean, intuitive interface, and even though AI has been touching so many aspects of our daily lives for so long, sometimes we don't even know it's happening. All of a sudden you have millions of people that feel like they're interacting directly with an AI. I think that's what's really kind of propelled the moment that we're in, for better or worse.
That consumer moment of technology. But hang on a second, because I hear the optimism, and Sri, I'm going to put you on the spot, because in the earlier session with Vint, he said it's fabulous fiction. And what he was really getting at is the percentage or the cases to which the model, even ChatGPT, gets it wrong. So he said to get his own bio, and they got facts wrong. So tell me about that, and contrasting the excitement about the power of the foundation model.
So like most of you, over the Christmas weekend, most families in the world and in Palo Alto specifically started searching and seeing Stump the ChatGPT-3 game, right? And of course it gets a lot of things wrong, a lot of things right as well on the shallow, at the first level of the interface. It's a beautiful interface, like Christine was mentioning. And the large language models, the attention is everything paper in 2017 truly unlocked a lot of things where you can just do transfer learning. Not every company needs to build the whole world universe LLM, but companies still have their own proprietary data that's not going to come outside. So there needs to be a local large language model that needs to be built within the context. Contextual learning, which I think Kunle was referring to, on the fly learning from all the questions that are coming at it. Yes. 100 million questions a day, that's a lot of new data that no one else has. And so as a result, there's a head start in that arms race. But the dominant aspect of business AI or business data is that it's still a very large, you're looking at the tip of the iceberg, it's a very large corpus of data, both whether it's call center data or phone calls that are going in, CRM data, customer-centric data, technology and finance data that's coming every day. That the models that can be trained on that data is still missing. And that's the piece that when someone is experiencing a deeper, a second level of questioning against ChatGPT 3, you'll run into some of those problems. But for the vast majority of audience, AI was a data science adventure, right? If you think about when the early days, when thanks Celesta for having us, when Celesta decided to invest in the AI companies way back in 2011, 2012, there was a lack of open AI. I mean, as much as we call open AI, it's not open source per se, right? So there's a lot of open source drove a lot of innovation. At the rate at which AI has been moving over the last, under the sea currents, if you will, over the last 10 years, suddenly you see the inflection point show up in everyone's homes. But that continuous improvement, the ImageNet movement for NLP happened in 2018. The ImageNet itself democratized deep learning, and deep learning is still widely still there. And I think where we are now seeing is this ability to bring your large language models to our large language models, and their large language models can create that marketplace of best predictions, best conversations, best contextualization of intelligence. And I think this is still the tip of the iceberg. So it's still very early days for AI. A lot of fear and resistance across the organization has dissolved because of ChatGPT 3. So now we can bring change, but the next 10 years, 15 years is still more tectonic changes ahead for us in terms of AI.
And Christian, you both mentioned there's a moment, and you described it as a consumer moment, the ease of use, the simplicity. I think maybe why a lot of people have said it was a Netscape aha, a light bulb that went off. How has this affected how your journey looks at your company, and how even just within your company people are talking about AI or even exploring use cases differently?
Yeah, it's captured people's imagination, I think, in a way that's really powerful. One of our tasks is to kind of channel that to appropriate places, because people have all kinds of ideas about it. But it's changed the way we thought about our company, not only near term, and I can give you some examples of applied AI, how we're running a lot of underwriting data through our AI models, but it also is really influencing the way we think about the future and innovation and where we're going. Just a quick thumbnail on Northwestern Mutual, Fortune 100 financial services company. Our core is insurance, but we offer wealth management, financial planning. Primary go-to-market is through 8,000 advisors. And so we've been engaging in this incredibly fun and imaginative discussion of what does it mean to interact with a client? What does it mean to have a financial planning conversation with a client in the future when we have all of these tools at our disposal? So happy to talk about kind of the far out as well as the near term.
Absolutely. So to maybe thread us towards the future of the capabilities, Kunle, can you tell us, a lot of us are experiencing, you just made this point, we're experiencing what the technology can do today. Can you give us a sense of some of the pieces, I mean, it's anyone's guess on the roadmap, but a little bit of what's around the corner beyond what we've been experiencing in ChatGPT, and maybe also personally what you're very excited about?
Yeah, so I think that, to say a little bit, along the lines of what Shri was getting at, that one of the things that we're going to see is, the fact that every company, every organization that needs to be operating in this AI-enabled world wants their own ChatGPT model with the capabilities of that backbone model, but trained on their own proprietary data, right? Because the reason that the ChatGPT, if you ask it about SambaNova, you ask it to ask, who are the founders, it's going to not remember one of the founders. It's going to ascribe all of the attributes of one of the founders to another founder. It's going to get all the facts wrong. And it's not going to have any of the details that you might want, if you wanted to have an internal knowledge base, right? So what companies will want is they will want a ChatGPT capability to deal and organize their unstructured data, the contracts, the emails, the Slack messages, the reports, all this data that is not in the database. You want a place of knowledge that can be mediated by some sort of AI. And so having the capability of having your own model behind the firewall with your proprietary data will dramatically change what sorts of capabilities and tasks your company can perform. So I think that is one of the things that we see coming, is the ability for every enterprise, every organization, if you're a small physician's organization that has proprietary patient data, or you're a lawyer with proprietary legal data, you want ChatGPT capabilities, but you want that behind your firewall with your proprietary data.
I mean, I'm just dreaming. I don't know about everyone else here, but when you say unstructured data in email, I'm like, my email inbox is the definition of unstructured data. So the transfer between a public good, something that is leveraging public data, to enterprise level data. Yeah. Christian, can you talk about...
So let me say one more word. So part of that transition is going to happen with open models.
Yes.
Right? Open models, today OpenAI has GPT-3 working on GPT-4. Those are proprietary models, and data that goes into those models from public repositories or even private data enhances their model, but they get to keep the model. Of course, if you give an organization your data, you want that data to remain private, and you'd like to keep that model. So that's the future. So the other piece that I didn't get to, but let me just mention,
go there.
Is what about context, right? So if you look at today, you look at the training of these models, the context is 100 or maybe 1,000 tokens. So that's not enough to understand long-form documents, understand books, understand videos with multiple. So that capability is coming, and that's going to be fundamentally different. And there are two aspects to that. One is systems that are much more capable of dealing with large memory for huge models, and then fundamentally models which are computationally more efficient than transformer models, which are the basis of the current large language models. So those are the two things that excite me. One is the rise of open source models, which means that it will fundamentally democratize our ability to use these foundation models in all kinds of organizations. And two, the ability to handle much, much larger problems and much, much larger data, so that we can build these models that are fundamentally more accurate and more capable.
And so I love this accuracy capability, and this is the crossover to the enterprise, which is already happening. So Christian, tell us about some of the use cases, and then we're also going to talk to Shri about some of the good applications as well. But give us a sense of what you have now, and also what you're building.
Yeah, absolutely. So sometimes people will ask me, like, what do you think are the use cases for AI? And I think, like, what are not the use cases for AI eventually? I think it ultimately becomes a question around how do we prioritize and sequence? What do we go after first? Yeah. Where is the size of the prize such we really want to go after it? There are two areas we're really focused on right now: underwriting and next best action kind of prompts for our advisors. Applying for life insurance can be painful. It's long. It takes 60 days. We might have to draw some fluids. There's tons of back and forth. There's a lot of that like gunk that we can get out with like just good old-fashioned automation. But AI is a total game changer here. So we have 3 models in production. Real-time a real-time test model. So traditionally, what would happen, you'd apply for life insurance and you wouldn't find out till much later in the process whether you needed to do a medical exam. The R10 model it runs immediately, provides a prediction whether you need a medical exam or not. You can get it scheduled. That's usually like a long pole in the tent kind of thing. Then you either go to one of 2 models of fluidless or fluid-based, where the AI is rendering, it's been trained by all of our historical mortality data, it's rendering an underwriting decision on you. And we've taken a process that went like 60 days to 2 or 3 days. And the models run beautifully, they're getting smarter all the time. It's a total game changer for our business. Better client experience, better productivity, less funnel loss, and it opens up these possibilities in the future. We'll continue to compress that underwriting time to a point where we'll probably be able to render an underwriting decision on you before you even apply. and we're just waiting for you to apply and give us permission to use your data, and then we can render that. And I don't think that's all that far off. So underwriting, and so today we're running 25% of our life insurance volume through these models, and we've got the largest individual life insurance market share, so it's a meaningful amount of volume. We're going to ramp that significantly in the next 2 years. We're also doing a lot of next best action work with our advisors, basic recommendation engine. These things have been around for a long time. The difference is today we can make the models a lot better, and we're collecting a lot more data on our clients. So propensity to purchase, propensity that a client has had a life event, propensity that a beneficiary can become a client. We're seeing amazing conversion rate uplift there, and it's just the beginning. So a ton that we can do, just really augmenting our advisors and how they go to market today.
It's incredible. And Sri, I mentioned this at the beginning. I mean, there are lots of use cases and applications, but you have also focused on the ones that do good for humanity. Can you describe some of the things that we can already do or have already seen benefits from?
I think, thanks for calling out. We started with AI with a mission to do good, right? Which brought us to do open source. And I think there's lots of, one of the use cases we just heard of during COVID, of course, a lot of death certificates need to be processed by one of our life insurers. So we built the best document reader for them so they can essentially process more efficiently without fear of fraud. Fraud prevention is at the heart of a lot of these AI models. AT&T, we saved them about $1.2 billion in preventing fraud. iPhone stealing was the use case there. But over the last year, what we found actually that robocalls suppression is just as much beneficial to the world in saving time. It's actually not until they deployed our platform to predict hurricanes, so preventing, figuring out which pole will go down in a hurricane. We found out that 41 days before, if the precipitation around that pole was high, that pole is likely to fall down, which led us to start then outreaching to many of the regions and creating FirstNet, which is the first response to a hurricane event. We got pulled into wildfire prevention and prediction globally. Bushfire, we ran a contest globally. And Australia, Commonwealth Bank of Australia, which is another customer of ours, ended up building a very large model locally, as well as Canada and here in San Jose State. And I think the ability to kind of bring AI to help predict climate change. Wildlife preservation was another big use case where we worked with a local NGO in Kenya, WildMe, and did the census of the endangered species there using user-generated photos. Today, that's the UN official endangered species census. I think one of the things that my daughters pulled me into working during pandemic was the pandemic proofing the supply chain for oxygen concentrators in India. And we managed to deploy across 200 small tier 2, tier 3 hospitals, oxygen concentrators we could deliver within 2 hours by putting them in the right location, as well as finding them, procuring at the right price point from China. So AI is absolutely an essential tool chain for many founders and investors in the audience for your philanthropy work just as much as purpose meets profit in AI.
So when I listen to both of you, both the purpose piece and the profit piece sound really attractive. The optimist in me is like, yes, let's go on that roadmap. But Kunle, can you explain? We don't have any regulatory guardrails, or they're just emerging. It's opt-in if companies want to have some sense of AI principles. Can you tell us a little bit about, and even just the data security of what you described, can you tell us a little bit about what we need to be thinking about in terms of responsible AI?
Yeah, I mean, you look at what AI models have been used for. They've been used to decide who gets insurance. They're being used to decide who gets parole. They're being used for all sorts of things where their bias could affect people who've traditionally not being treated fairly by society. So there's the issue of fairness. And with foundation models, there's the issues of how the model has been trained, right? Is it being trained, in ways that would make the model fundamentally biased? And then if that's the case, how can we reduce or potentially eliminate this bias? And there is certainly some work going on at Stanford about how to train models which are not as biased as the data on which they were trained. But then there's also the issue of how is that model being used, right? Is it being used to spread misinformation? Or is it being used for purposes that are fundamentally not good for society? So I think these questions about we have this great power within AI, and we need to worry about both the models and how they were developed. What sort of data was brought to bear? Was that data fundamentally biased? Is the model biased? How can we eliminate that? And then sort of how are these models being used, and how can we create the sort of structure that would make these models would constrain, well, not constrain, but how can we make sure that there is some societal oversight on what is being developed? And one of the ways of making it possible that these models can be more widely distributed and potentially provide less. One way would be to make it possible for more people to have access to developing these models, right? So going back to this idea of open source models and the ability for more organizations to develop their own models and develop the ones that would have the right sort of constraints and the right sort of unbiased operation. If all the, it'd be great if the large organizations provided a single model that was, completely fair and had none of the issues that we consider. But I don't believe that's ever going to happen. So what you need is a democratization that we were talking about earlier, where more people have the capability to build these models, more people have the ability to use these models, and more people have the ability to scrutinize the results that these models are providing.
I completely.
I was going to say, Christian, how are you managing?
I completely agree with that. So I'll just make just 2 points. So from a debiasing, it's something that we're really, really concerned about. So we use all kinds of third parties to look at any inherent, unintended bias in any of the AIs we run. Internally, we have really robust model governance structures and various risk committees that I and people at my level sit on to understand what's going on and make sure that everything that we're doing we can stand behind. The piece that I feel really strongly about, and I think we're just really in the early days, is driving the right conversation at the executive team level and the board level around these issues. It's easy to get super excited about all of the strategic applications, and that's wonderful, and I love driving those conversations too. But we need to have a deeper philosophical, ethical, ongoing dialogue in the C-suite, at the board table, upskill people so they understand what they're talking about. And we really need to wrestle with the humanity, the ethical considerations of this, because I think it's going to change our world so fundamentally.
But to put you on the spot, Christian, I mean, there are a whole bunch of people who manage their boards and react. What are the 3 questions that you think the 3 questions you think should be management and the board should be having about AI?
So I don't know if I would necessarily boil it down to 3 questions. My approach right now is just making sure that we're having the dialogue on a regular basis. I think sometimes, the C-suite or boards, they want what are the 3 questions? Let's answer them. It's answered. Let's move on. Today's business. You can almost adopt a little bit of a reductive approach. What I'm trying to propose is we just need to be talking about this stuff a lot, because there's a lot we haven't figured out, and there are a lot of problems we haven't even faced yet. So how do we start to collaboratively develop the language, the frameworks that are going to govern this? Because it's going to be one of the key management challenges of this generation of executives. I
think the general wisdom in AI circles, maker circles of AI, is all models are wrong, some models are useful, right? And where Kunle was going was that with enough eyes, all bias is also shallow. I think if the data that we trained on is historically, there's a new concept that So we've started defining terms for the NIST on understanding what is disparate decision, right? What is bias, because data has inherently, if you don't have bias in data, you can't amplify the signal. So you need statistical bias, right? But ethical bias is what we are talking about here. Can we now create data sets that are not traumatized by hundreds of years of what we thought was okay in the past, like redlining and others, right? So you need to create new data sets and create this adversarial debiasing as a process before models go to production. So banks historically have had the most regulated MRMs. I mean, when you ask about the question of what needs to be the discussion at the board level, is to create that model risk management, just like you do financial risk management. As an example, take the Zillow case, right? Z-Estimate was created to excite people to bring homes to Zillow. Now, if you start using Z-Estimate to acquire homes, it's not conceptually sound. So you need to start looking for conceptual soundness of the model before applying it for a different purpose. Yep. And I think that's kind of the model documentation process. We build a model documentation automatically for our automatic machine learning platform called driverless AI. We auto-generate all the model requirement process. Then the second piece is documents have become source of data, and that's where the unstructured data or video and audio are becoming sources of data. So a lot of the new AI that's being deployed inside the customers is focusing on reading documents more efficiently. Before, you would not get 60 to 75% accuracy was the most you would get. Today, you're able to get, with the help of large language models, able to get not just the bounded box right, but the language inside the box absolutely right. So we've delivered about 96, 97% accuracy on reading bank statements or pay stubs. And so overall, the cost of lending decision has become much lower, right? And that's value for the customers. We ran, for PwC, we built Audit AI over the last 4 or 5 years. Last quarter, they did 1,200 audits, hands-free, right? That's about $400 million savings for them. So companies are beginning to see these wins, but I think the question around how to make it responsible so you don't inadvertently replicate the decisions we made that was okay for the from 1900 to be okay now. But I think it all starts with data. The data is the fuel for AI.
So there's a bit of excitement. There's also the pause and responsible. But Christian, tell us if you could take anywhere, like a fantastic use case that you dream about, a little bit untethered by some of the constraints you have. Tell us where that would take you.
Yeah, so this is an idea I'm really excited about. It could be a terrible idea, but I'm excited about it nonetheless. So a lot of our business is deferred gratification. Save money, make this choice today. You're going to be much better off in the future. Sometimes people do that, sometimes they don't. And often they don't do it because it's difficult for them to visualize it. And so a concept that we've been playing around with in our innovation lab is this interesting intersection of the metaverse and generative AI. So you could imagine a financial planning conversation in the metaverse where you've got a generative AI that's listening to it. And as the financial advisor is telling the client, hey, if you take these actions, you're going to be able to pay for all of your kids to go to college. And then you're sitting on the stage, your kids are graduating from college. Or if you save all this money, you make these good choices, you'll be able to buy that vacation home. And then all of a sudden you can visualize that vacation home in real life immediately in the metaverse. So Vince said that generative AI is good at telling stories. It is, but we could use those stories in a way to help people make better financial decisions, to take some of that satisfaction of living a disciplined life that you only realize at the tail end and help people feel a little bit of that today such that they make better financial decisions. Maybe it will work, maybe it won't, but it's something I'm excited about in terms of an application.
That is so cool. So all of you have spent, between the three of you, you've got 60 plus years in this arena. And we talked about all of us having kids. I think across all of us, we have 2 to 5 kids each, and kind of the oldest one is 21, and the youngest one I think is 8. So when we imagine forward what our kids will feel is normal. Kunle, let me start with you. What do you imagine your children doing, 10, 15 years from now with AI? Or what do you hope that they'll be doing and experiencing?
That's a really good question. So, as I told you, my kids are very different. One is a nerd like me and likes to do things that have to do with coding and CS. He's a CS major at Stanford. And the other is very, humanities oriented. He likes to talk to people. He's much better politician than he likes interacting with people. So, I think that what they'll be doing is that they'll be working with technological environments that are very personalized, that are optimized for them, right? And optimized for their particular, the way in which they learn, the way in which they consume information, and the way that pleases them. So I think that ultimately what we want to get to with all of this technology is to enable us to be as realized as people as possible in the way that both excites us, entertains us, and extends us.
Oh. Shri, you already have daughters who are prompting you on how to use the technology that you create for good. What do you imagine them doing in their 30s and 40s with this?
Well, I think it's it's a good question, I would say. But AI, we've been playing with AI for kids, right? So every time I tried, most of my lessons I learn that actually end up at work or at my professional life or at home, because the children, they are fearless, and they're absolutely relentless about what they like. They cry for what they want, right? So to that degree, AI for kids, even teaching them AI on Saturdays got me a curriculum that actually we are now trying to deploy AI for congressmen and AI for congresswomen and senators in Georgetown, because it's the same level of simplification that you need to explain it to someone who's not in our space, right? So that's the first order of course, the kids today are going to inherit an incredibly rich, technologically superpowers that historically most of the previous generation did not have. So I think there's going to be a much larger one expectation from the world, but the shadow that they can have, the impact that they can have is huge, not just in terms of global reach. Most of the fundraising that they had done for philanthropic work was done online. During COVID days, you did not need to go out. So you can generate grassroots movement and build communities at scale without having to leave your home. So there's a lot of real benefits we have today in a very integrated world. AI is going to obviously take away a lot of the things that are automatable. A lot of like code generation. Today, my anticipation by 2030, you will have 20 to 40 people-sized companies, be trillion-dollar valued companies with AI, because you don't have to do all the same things that we did before. That was like that needed a lot of people on your team. So there will be a whole generation of AI-powered companies that are just starting using the innovations that the previous generation has done, or most of us have put together. So the next generation of companies are going to be dramatically large, from a very small teams. And I think for my children, I expect them to take advantage of all this automation and intelligence and be more human, right? The ability for us to we were talking about metaverse. We built an generated AI meta gallery for Aboriginal art out of Australia. And so it's recommending for you as you're walking through the system, through the experience. Once you start doing, one of the things we learned is the Aborigines don't have a word for time, right? In other words, they're able to experience world in dreams and wakes. So our ability to start reverting back to the pre-steam engine, where the steam engine started the rise of time and everybody knew when they missed 9:05 versus 9. I think our ability to be more emotionally involved, more focused on what we really want to experience versus what we are expected to do as machines. So I think refrain from what Kunle was saying. We can be more human beings, right?
I love the humanity piece. Christian, you for the last word.
So I'm the one with 5 kids, so our
Yes,
house
you're
is
the
a little crazy. So I think a lot about our little guy. His name's Hugh. He's 8 years old. He's kind of a devil child. I don't know, maybe it's the youngest of a big family. He's so tech savvy, it's amazing. So when he was 5, he logged on to the family Amazon account and purchased himself one of those battery-powered sit-in cars. So it showed up at the house one day. We didn't know where it had come from. And and Hugh's got his face in the corner of a room, like embarrassed that it had come. So I think about 2 things relative to Hugh. Hopefully he uses his powers for good rather than evil long term. But he's good. He will never remember a time when there wasn't a mobile phone, an iPhone or an iPad or an Alexa or whatever. So many of our businesses have some human element, the advisor or a physician in person or whatever. You've got a generation of kids that are growing up interacting with technology in just a fundamentally different way than anybody in this room. And where does that take us? So I think a lot about that. And then I look at Hugh too, and I think, man, what job are you going to have when 10, 15 years from now? What should you be studying? Philosophy or something? I don't know. It's like his career arc, what will be a meaningful, productive life for him? It kind of blows your mind to even consider it.
Well, with that, I would love to ask everyone to give a huge round of applause for these amazing panelists. I know that you have questions, so they are still here. You can ask them questions, but we have Mark, who's coming up next with Kara Swisher, where we can continue to dream, but also maybe be really practical about what's not working today in our society. But at least with that, we're leaving with an optimistic hope. Thank you, everyone, so much. And I'll welcome Mark on the stage and thank our panelists once more.